Hi, this is Mohammed Khan, and you're watching the Unemployed GM Podcast Network. As I said earlier, it's still not a podcast network, but it's a work in progress. I did a vlog yesterday about Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and I wanted to come back today to talk about English cricket and cricket in general. And the premise of this conversation is stems from a couple articles that came out this week, or news, if you will, that came out this week in the Daily Mail from Lawrence Booth, Tim Wigmore, and others about the 100. My affiliation with the 100 is very menial. Um, when the 100 was first starting, I was having some conversations with uh, a couple of the franchises or the teams about working with them on the draft. But that didn't that fell through. And I've since followed the 100, but probably not with the same kind of intensity that I do other leagues and other teams around the world. Um, and The reality is that the 100 is usually on my schedule in the summer, but I've never actually watched a full game of the 100, so I don't really have real good sense of the cadence of the format and of the product. Obviously, they've been getting really good crowds, and I think it's there's been aspects of it that have been pretty good. But obviously now, front and center part of the conversation is possibly chopping the 100. And there are some executive aspects to this as well, right? Because Richard Gould was the CEO of English Cricket Today. He used to be the CEO of Surrey. Surrey is one of the more powerful, county cricket teams in England. And the same with I think Richard Thompson was also, I think he was either chairman of Surrey or I think he was the chairman of Surrey. But if I'm wrong, please correct me. So, obviously with that conversation, I believe that the 100 can coexist with the other competitions in English cricket. But I think I wanted to comment on this because the county season has started. I think we're entering the third or fourth round now, and I've been watching actually a lot of the county games and on on YouTube, and it's been really fun. I had the opportunity to watch Middlesex and Notts last week. A lot of really good players playing. Notts makes a really interesting declaration, and Middlesex chases down the score. Guys that are normally pretty conservative batsmen, guys like Mark Stoneman, are playing run a ball, being really aggressive. I think all of that is really good for the county game. But I'm building this vlog based on some of the conversations about the 100, and I want to speak to what I believe is the biggest problem in cricket today. The biggest problem in cricket today, and it's always been this way, is the fact that the vast majority of cricket matches that we watch um, are essentially glorified exhibitions, right? So, for example, right now, there are three cricket competitions that are going on, and a couple of smaller ones. The first is obviously the IPL, which is the biggest competition in cricket right now, is happening. Um, Mostly catered for the Indian audience. Pakistan is playing against New Zealand at home, a one-day series and a T20 series. Again, mostly catered for the Pakistani audience. And then Sri Lanka is playing Ireland in a really interesting test series, actually. And I think the question is if you're a cricket fan, why should you watch these series, right? If some non-cricket person were to say, "Hey, why are you watching Sri Lanka Ireland? Is this like a World Cup? Is this something really important?" What would you answer to that question? And I think that there isn't a good answer, right? It's essentially a lot of time wasting, and this is coming from someone who's worked in the game, someone who's benefited from cricket, someone who really loves the game, and he wants to, and who has the best interests of the game at heart. What is the justification apart from just loving Ireland or loving Pakistan or loving India and the IPL for watching these? Right? What is the context behind it? The reality is that the vast majority of cricket that's played around the world doesn't have context, right? It's essentially glorified exhibitions, right? It's like an international friendly in football, or I think the best example of this is spring training in baseball, and that's not good enough. And that's not good enough. And The other thing is that this isn't new, right? I think this is coming up now because there's a lot of meaningless bilateral matches in between T20 competitions, and a lot of times what's happening is that the best players aren't playing in these bilateral series like New Zealand right now, and fans view these as kind of international friendlies, like we do when we watch football, and that's not how they viewed it before. And I want to correct that, because I think the fact is that it's always been this way, right? Um, the only thing is that because of the way the cricket fan thinks, he didn't see it before. He or she didn't see it before. But the reality is that when India is playing a random series against you know South Africa, what does it really mean? It doesn't really mean anything. And so there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that cricket doesn't have any kind of integrated ecosystem, right? It's kind of member boards operating on their own, making their own decisions. It's survival of the fittest. When England was the most powerful cricket board, they did it their way. When Australia was the most powerful cricket board, they did it their way. And now when India is the most powerful cricket board, they're doing it their way. And that's kind of the way the world works, right? And so there's a reason why this is happening, right? There's a reason why all of us who are cricket fans are watching meaningless cricket every single day, right? There's a reason for that. Um, and let me just say, before I move on, is that when you play a lot of meaningless cricket, and when the schedule and the structure doesn't make sense, it really impacts history, right? And so we're slowly heading into a place where the next generation of cricketers, it's going to be hard to compare them to the players of the past, right? The Viv Richards of the world, the Sachins of the world, even the Virat Kohlis of the world, because they're just going to be playing a shitload of T20 matches, and you're never going to really know, you know, they're not going to play Test cricket a lot. They're not going to play a lot of one-day cricket, and so you're going to essentially see the same player playing the same innings over and over and over and over again. Um, but that's a conversation for another day. So why is cricket devoid of context, right? Why are we watching games that are essentially exhibitions, right? How do we justify this to our wives, if or if you're a woman who loves cricket, and there's a lot of them? How do you justify this to your husband, right? That you're sitting down and watching cricket, that's essentially a friendly match. Um, the first thing is, I actually put some blame on the fans, as a fan myself. Uh, I think a lot of cricket fans have narrow exposure, and so they haven't had the opportunity to watch a lot of NBA, NFL, European football. That's changing now because of globalization and access to information and access to leagues and different platforms. But historically, we've just bought whatever our member board has sold us, whatever the ICC has sold us, and I'm not really sure what we've gotten for it. So, for example, in the 80s, the triangular series, the quadrangular series, all those meaningless series that happened in Sharjah that we were obsessed over. If you were a Pakistani fan or an Indian fan, what do they really mean? They didn't really mean anything, but they were sold at that time. And now, there are no quadrangular series or triangular series, and the argument is that they don't have any economic viability. But why did they have economic viability then? And so the reality is that we were starved for content, and now there's just a shitload of content, right? There's a shitload of content. The only problem is it doesn't mean anything. And it didn't then, it didn't now. And I think fans need to hold their member boards more accountable. They need to hold their franchises and their leagues more accountable. They need to hold the ICC more accountable. And I think that hasn't happened. And part of that is the media. Now, the big problem with the media is not in countries like the UK or Australia, right? Because I think those are vibrant societies. The media holds their cricket boards accountable. Tom Harrison, who was the previous chief executive of the ECB, has been held accountable by cricket fans, by members of counties, with everything that was going on in county cricket last year, and it's still going on today. Everything that went on with 100, there's a lot of tough questions asked. Now, things happened anyways, but there was resistance in the system. And if you look at countries, unfortunately, like Pakistan and India, two of the bigger countries, obviously India is the biggest, there's not a lot of resistance. There's a lot of cheerleading. And in Pakistan's case, there's a lot of criticism for the sake of criticism. There's a lot of agenda-driven stuff out there as well, specifically in Pakistan. And I think that's just because media in Pakistan is completely unregulated, and obviously, not a lot of professionalism either. So I think, it's part of it is the fans not holding those in power accountable. Part of it is the media not holding those in power accountable. The third thing is that cricket doesn't have necessarily a regulatory body. The ICC should be that. They should be kind of cricket's version of FIFA or UEFA, who are governing the game and putting and making sure that the best interests of the game are advanced. I think the ICC at times has tried to do that, but the reality is that I think that when they have done it, they haven't executed well, and other times they haven't done it. And so, what the ICC essentially has is the ICC is governing a couple of competitions, the T20 World Cup, which is obviously a massive success, and also the One Day World Cup. The World Test Championship is, it's a good idea in theory. The execution is really, really poor. But the ICC, in terms of developing a structure, a product around the game, growing the game, I think the numbers might indicate that they are. I would say that that growth is kind of suboptimal. I think that we've only touched the surface of cricket's economic growth, both globally and also, internally within our specific countries. And I think the ICC is a part of that, right? I think the ICC is not doing enough uh, to bring countries together. The next thing is the member board, right? The member boards, a lot of them are compromised, right? So if you look at the BCCI is run by Jay Shah essentially, and Jay Shah is the son of Amit Shah, who is Narendra Modi's right hand man, right? So Indian cricket is essentially run from the lens of the BJP, right? So whatever you think about the BJP's politics, should cricket in India be run from the lens of a political party? We talk about politicization. Zimbabwe's been stripped of their status or suspended in different times. Afghanistan because of the ingress of politics. But if you look at India, Pakistan, politics is all over cricket, right? So, Jay Shah is a great example of that. Not saying that Jay Shah is not a good administrator or qualified, but the reality is that Indian cricket is run from the lens of Jay Shah, Amit Shah, and the BJP. And should it be that way? And I think the answer to that is no. There should be better corporate governance in place, like there is in Australia and England. That's not to say that those two countries are perfect, but it's a little bit better than certainly India. And Pakistan's another example, right? So Pakistan's run by Najim Sethi right now. Najim Sethi was also a chairman previously. And Naram Sethi, what's his qualification for being the chairman of the PCB? His qualification is that he's close to the Sharif dynasty, he's close to the Bhutto dynasty, he's close to the Pakistan army. And to understand the Sharif and Bhutto dynasty, specifically the Sharif dynasty, the Supreme Court of Pakistan described them as the Sicilian mafia, right? They compared them to the Sicilian mafia. And so Najam Sethi's qualification is that he's close to the Sharifs. That's his qualification. And so he is driving the agenda. So the agenda from Pakistan is being driven by someone who's a part of that, right? Who's a part of that kind of who's part of that mafia apparatus, right? Who's a beneficiary of that system. And so it's a real challenge, right? Cricket as a sport, right? That the people that are running the game, the people that have influence, the people that have votes, the people that are in positions to make decisions are essentially people that come from a specific background, a specific lens that doesn't lend itself to meritocracy, that doesn't lend itself to kind of elite executive management. And it hurts the game, right? It hurts the growth of the game within those respective countries and obviously globally as well. So that doesn't help, right? The other thing is that cricket doesn't have a lot of great executives. The NFL is the NFL today. The NFL had 300,000 people in St. Louis for an NFL draft because Wellington Mara, the owner of the Giants at the time in the 50s or 60s, the Mara family, which still own the Giants today, decided that the Giants, which play in the biggest market in the world, in New York, and the Green Bay Packers, which play in the smallest market in the U.S., are going to have access to the same revenues, that there's going to be revenue sharing, that we're going to grow the game together. And then years later, the NFL has 300,000 people in St. Louis for an NFL draft event where the commissioner, all he's doing is coming up to the podium every 5 to 10 minutes to say XYZ player is being drafted. That's it. People are there to watch that, and they're watching it on TV as well. So, um, I think it's because there's a collective wisdom in sports around the world, whether it's the Bundesliga, whether it's in the Premier League, whether it's in La Liga. There's a real drive to develop these sports and develop these leagues by you don't have to agree with them. Some of them are corrupt as well. But generally speaking, those sports are way ahead of cricket, right? They're way ahead of cricket. There's no real even competition, right? The last thing is the hegemony in cricket, right? And this is not to criticize any particular country. A hegemon is never going to think about the greater good. That's just the way the world works. We live in a multipolar world today, with the U.S. Dominating, is one superpower, and the other superpower is China. I don't think that anyone thinks that the U.S. Or U.S. foreign policy is thinks about the best interests of the world. They certainly do not, right? Or they think about justice. They don't. China doesn't either. Um, and if we talk about it in the lens of cricket, when England was dominating cricket, or when Australia was dominating cricket, they didn't either, right? They thought about England and cricket, and English cricket first, Australian cricket first. And the BCCI is no different, right? They're driving the game from their perspective, right? And they're controlling the game from their perspective, to their benefit, and to the detriment of cricket's growth around the world. And I think people will disagree with that. I'm happy to have that conversation, but that's just the reality, and it's not their fault, right? It's the fault of the other boards. It's the fault of the ICC, for not, developing a more cohesive, a more coherent, a more unified approach to taking the game forward, and they haven't done that. And so, for me, I want to go back to 2005, where I wrote this article, and I shared this email with somebody, that was really important in the game of cricket. And I said the future of cricket is local. What does that mean? The future of cricket is local doesn't mean that we should get rid of international cricket. It doesn't mean that we should get rid of ICC events. It doesn't mean that the world should just be a bunch of T20 franchise leagues that are unregulated. It means that to globalize the game internationally, to grow the game organically, to optimize the cricket economy the world over, the future of cricket has to be local. It has to begin from that level. And I said this in 2005. And what does that look like? Well, that looks like Mumbai versus Karachi. That looks like London versus Sydney. That looks like Cape Town versus Melbourne. That looks like Trinidad, versus Durban. That looks like Lahore versus Colombo. That looks like Kabul versus Wellington. That's what that looks like, and I stand by that. Unfortunately, cricket has become so fragmented, and the growth of cricket over the last 15, 20 years has been so unregulated that building that ecosystem is a little bit more challenging today than it was back then, but it's still possible, right? And I think if you're an owner of a team right now, and you're a private owner of a team right now, um, this is something that is in your interest, right? You want to grow the game organically. So while the IPL is a hugely successful T20 league, all these owners are making a ton of money, the valuations are through the roof. Some of these other leagues are actually less lucrative. In fact, they're not lucrative at all. A lot of the owners are losing money. A lot of the leagues are losing money. And so there needs to be a coming together. There needs to be an incentive to develop this ecosystem. And so let me now share with you, my theory, or excuse me. Let me now share with you, um, the way I think it should be, or as I said, my theory. Um, I believe that ICC events, franchise T20 leagues, bilateral cricket, domestic cricket, and the three formats can not only coexist, but they can thrive. I believe that, right? So right now, you read a lot of articles and a lot of conversation pieces. I think Usman Samudin wrote about this recently, that you have to choose, right? ICC events are not going anywhere. Franchise T20 leagues are not going anywhere. IPL is not going anywhere. So it has to be the death of bilateral cricket. It has to be the death of test cricket. It has to be the death of this. It has to be the death of that. And I believe that cricket's strength is its diversity, right? West Indies cricket, South African cricket, the different formats, the history of the game. That's cricket's strength, right? 2 years ago, I think when Australia toured Pakistan, the Test series was pretty horrendous because the pitches were really bad. But the crowds were really good, right? We saw in the late afternoon sessions, people really come and watch those Test matches, whether it was Karachi or Lahore. Lahore in particular had really good crowds. Pindi always has really good crowds. We also saw the one-day games, right? The 50-over games have really good crowds, specifically in Lahore. And I think it goes to show you that fans really like diversity. And I'll give you an example. Last year, or the year before that, I went to a minor league cricket game here in the U.S. It was really well done and organized in Philadelphia. And a person in the media was saying to me that T20 cricket is too long, and I was like, really, T20 cricket is too long? What's the end game here? Are we going to go to 10? Are we going to go to 5? Are we going to have a collection of super overs? What is the end game here? And so eventually, if we don't embrace cricket's diversity, people are going to get sick and tired of T20 cricket. And so cricket's strength is its diversity. It's the diversity in how the game is played and how players grow up and how players develop, right? Every country has its kind of own unique personality. A game that's in Mirpur in Bangladesh has its own quality. A game in Lahore, a game in Birmingham, a game at Leeds, a game in Sydney, the Sydney Test. All of these things are part of the brand of cricket and how, we should be embracing these things, not pushing them away. And so I believe that all of these things can function together, but there has to be a will and there has to be some kind of logic behind building and developing a system, right? There has to be some force behind developing a system, which doesn't exist right now. And so who's going to fix this? Well, the first thing is that we need people having these conversations. That's the first thing. The second thing is that who can and cannot fix this? India can fix this, right? India is obviously the best candidate to fix this because they have the most control, they have the economic resources. Um, but the reality is, as I said earlier, they're not going to do that, right? They're leading cricket, they're running cricket. They're not going to give that up, right? They're not going to think about growing the game globally. That's not something that's going to be on top of mind. The ICC, in terms of these decisions, has historically been kind of rudderless, and there are some really smart people at the ICC. Some good additions, Wasim Khan. I think some others. Really, really smart people at the ICC, some who I've met. I had some really good conversations with them. But the reality is that, in practice, the ICC has mastered, the World Cup. The ICC has done a great job in bringing sponsors to these events. I think the other areas that the ICC can be involved in and they can do more in, they're not, in my opinion. But let's see. But I don't think that they're the answer. Um, who's sorry? I'm getting a message on my screen, so I'm just sorry, sidetrack. England, in my opinion, is the one cricket board that can drive this change, right? Because English cricket has a certain legacy, a certain history, and it has a certain corporate governance system that lends to accountability, that lends to resistance. So the first thing that English cricket has is not the English cricket team; it's actually county cricket, and I think that's where I want to begin. I believe that county cricket can become the most lucrative cricket competition in the world. Right? So where IPL is the most lucrative T20 league in the world, and that's not going to stop. That's not going to change. In my opinion, what English cricket has with county cricket is completely undervalued. It's been undermined. It's been undermined by the ECB, by men like Andrew Strauss, who I'm shocked by some of the things that came out of the Andrew Strauss review last year. Um, but there's been a real resistance, right? There's been a resistance from members. There's been a resistance from fans, and and that's really important, right? And so the English fan, I think, is really, really, really important. And so, what does county cricket have? What does English cricket have that make them candidates for leading this renaissance, right? For leading this build of product, for leading this kind of development of ecosystem. And I think it starts with county cricket and it starts with the English fan. What does county cricket have that makes it special? First of all, county cricket has history. They have history behind it, both English and then so many foreign players have gone into county cricket and made a lives for themselves, right? Imran Khan, Viv Richards, Clive Lloyd, all the great players from the West Indies. Um, so many great South Africans, Australians have gone to county cricket and played there, and so there's a legacy to county cricket. The second thing is the infrastructure, right? All the great stadiums in England, whether it's Lords, whether it's Old Trafford, whether it's Leeds, um, really, that infrastructure is really valuable. The third thing is, English cricket has all these counties have organizations, right? They have organizational infrastructure, right? If you look at, other organizations around the world in cricket, they don't have the kind of same type of organizational infrastructure that the counties have, right? Having a chief executive, having a commercial director, having people in performance on the sporting side, having people on the business side, and so they have that infrastructure that makes them, really, really, um, powerful and solid to kind of develop this. And so, what does that look like? And then, let me just say the English fan, right? The English fan still, there are still people that come to watch county games. They're members of counties, paying members of counties. Uh, there are people that still watch the Vitality Blast and the Royal One Day Cup. There are, the English fan still cares a lot about Test cricket, not just the Ashes, but Test cricket in general. Um, and so I think the English fan is also exposed, right? The English fan sees the Premier League every day throughout the year. Even when games aren't happening, it's part of the conversation, right? European football. So the English fan is quite, educated and has a lot of exposure. And I think that's a strength for England. And so, what does that look like, right? What does that ecosystem look like? So, I believe that, forget, restricting, right? Andrew Strauss was trying to restrict the amount of county cricket, minimize the teams in county cricket. I would go so far as to say that there aren't enough competitions in county cricket. And so, what does that mean? That means that there's the county championship, there's the one day league, there's the Vitality Blast, there's 100. I would say that there's a world where English cricket can have 7 competitions and maybe 10 products. I see that. And all of it can make sense, right? So while the county championship can make a lot of sense as an isolated competition, it could also be interconnected to other competitions, right? And I think England's in a position because of its relationship with Sky, with BT, with all the OTTs around the world, with the technology that they have at their disposal, the fan that they have at their disposal, right? England is still a place that people gravitate to, right? London is a place that people gravitate to. The English summer is still a big brand. Uh, all of these things combined together give English cricket the opportunity to develop an ecosystem, and to develop what I believe is the most lucrative domestic competition in the world. I think a year ago or 2 years ago, Kevin Peterson mentioned the idea of privatizing county cricket. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with that, or although generally speaking, I do agree with the idea of privatization. But this is not about that, right? There's a way to make this better without even doing that. But there's a way to incorporate that too, right? Bring in private money and does incentivize some good things, right? So one of the reasons for the Ranji Trophy, the Qaid Azam Trophy, county cricket, and it's the most ridiculous reason in the world, is that the job of Durham County Cricket Club is to develop players for England. That is their purpose. And let me just tell you right now, that is not that should not be their purpose. Um, Player development is a byproduct of developing incentives within a system, right? Developing a good system. Once you develop a good system, players are going to develop, right? The best example of that is European football, right? Clubs are incentivized to develop players, right? And in cricket, what's happening is that these cricket boards and these counties, for example, are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to host the Ranji Trophy, to host the Qaid Azam Trophy, to host the Sheffield Shield, for the sole purpose of developing talent. It's ridiculous. If you were to mention this to someone who worked in the NBA or the MLS or another league around the world or another sport, they would laugh in your face that this is how you are using your resources. There's almost no value to developing that player, right? apart from the fact that England's going to win games, or Pakistan's going to win games, or India's going to win games. There's almost no economic impact of that development, right? And so apart from the expense and the cost of running and operating these tournaments, there's actually there's no economic impact that's generated from them, either directly or indirectly. And so the other component of this, apart from the competition, I'm going to get to this in a different vlog, is the scheduling part of this, right? And so, generally speaking, right now the county cricket season is happening. It's run from April to October. I believe that the county cricket season should run from February, March, all the way to October. Now, how is that? Well, I don't believe that all games that every single game in the county championship or the other competitions in county cricket should be played in England. I don't believe that. I think that there's a real opportunity to grow the game and develop the game by taking it to other countries, to other places. And not only does that help grow the game, not only does that expand the tent for broadcasters, expand the tent for sponsors and stakeholders, and attracts fans, it also develops your players. So, for example, excuse me, if the county cricket season were to start in the UAE or Bangladesh or West Indies, that's a really great opportunity to develop other aspects of your game as a player, right? So there's a player development component in it as well, and really the goal has to be to grow the game. Ultimately, the goal has to be to grow the cricket economy in an organic way, where everybody benefits, right? Right now, the few are benefiting. Everybody isn't benefiting, and English cricket can really make a dent, and make an impact, on this subject matter, right? So I'm going to come back with another blog that describes these things in a little bit more detail. Uh, but I think the big points here, and the ones that I wanted to get out into the public sphere, is county cricket has an opportunity to be the most lucrative domestic competition in the world, right? And other cricket boards can do the same thing, right? The second thing is that there aren't enough games in English cricket, right? The season is not long enough. There's opportunities for more games, and more competitions, right? And it's really about finding the right product market fit, and really embracing the three formats, and county cricket to do that, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing is the scheduling. The scheduling of county cricket, the scheduling of cricket in general, is awful. It doesn't make any sense. Whether it's domestic cricket, whether it's even these franchise T20 leagues, whether it's the bilateral calendar. I'm going to do a vlog at some point about how you structure your bilateral calendar throughout the year, right? Who should you play, when you should play them, over a 3-year cycle, over a 4-year cycle. How many one days should you play a year? How many T20 should you play a year? How many tests should you play a year? All of these things. The reason that I care about this is it's not only about developing the game, it's also about developing the economy of the game, right? It's actually about growth. And cricket doesn't have optimized growth right now. And so the season should be longer. And then the final piece of this is the ICC. Once England is able to prove product market fit, the ICC can then come in and then reconcile the game of cricket at the highest level. And so there's a world where right now the ICC is running 3 competitions. I'm not really counting. That's including the WTC, which I'm not really enthused about. I think it's a great idea. I think the execution is really, really bad. But there's a world where the ICC has 6, 7 competitions, maybe 8, 9, 10 products, that they are selling to the world every year, and making a lot of money doing that. And that money can then be used to expand the game around the world, right? To expand the game into the US, Canada, China, Brazil, other countries around the world. And I know the one thing that I will say about the ICC is that they're trying to do that. I just don't think that they're trying to do that in the right way, right? I don't think that the strategy is right. And we see this around the world as well, right? So, I wanted to do this vlog for a while. I hope this was valuable. I hope this conversation is taken on by someone who has a greater voice than certainly I do. And let's see where this goes, right? I'm going to keep talking about this. I'm going to expand on some of the points, what these competitions are, how they should be interconnected, in fact, Andrew, we can find some inspiration from something Andrew Strauss did when he was the managing director of English Cricket a while ago. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do to fix our sport. Our sport needs a lot of work. I think our sport is a great sport. It has a ton of potential. We need to drive the conversation around making it better. We really need to do that, and I hope this is something that is going to start that, or is going to advance that, or if it started already and I don't know about it, that it's going to be a part of that. And I think it was really important to document it, on this platform. So, with that, I want to thank you. I'm going to come back with another vlog either today or tomorrow, um, about what the PCB is doing to Sean Masood, which um, is unjust on so many levels. And so, please watch this, please share it, please comment on it. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you.